Hello YouTube and welcome back to my channel. It's Bruno Pozo here with Elvira Media, and I know it's been a little bit of a while since I've recorded something in front of the camera, but that's because I've been a lazy piece of but that doesn't matter. What matters is I'm back and you're going to be seeing more of me once again, and we're going to start with something a little bit different, and that's actually some movie reviews. I'm sure if you've clicked on this video, you've either watched these movies already, but if you haven't, I'm going to save you some time on one of them and I'll recommend the other. And so what movies are we talking about today? Well, we're going to talk about Crimes of the Future and Watcher. So these movies came out recently, I think within the last 2-3 weeks, and I was excited for both of them. In fact, Crimes of the Future I was a little more excited about because I'm somewhat vaguely familiar with David Cronenberg. The only movie I guess I saw of his was The Fly with Jeff Goldblum. Classic body horror film. And Watcher was sort of just, I like the idea of it. It's more of like a voyeuristic male gaze feminist horror film. I'll get onto that later in the video. Either way, I like horror. This is like my favorite genre of film easily to watch. And I was excited for Crimes of the Future, but I'll have to say I was very disappointed by it. So let's actually start with that movie, Crimes of the Future. So first, the obvious stuff. Cinematography, fantastic. This movie looks amazing. There's no qualms with that. I don't have any qualms with the cinematography. I think the lighting is great. It's very beautifully shot. The framing is sometimes questionable. I did notice that in certain dialogue scenes, specifically with our main character, which is this artist, he's left justified on the screen, and then the person he's talking to is also left justified. So they end up just sitting on the same side of the screen talking to each other. I don't know if this is supposed to be symbolic for something or if there's a deeper meaning or if some sort of artistic liberty being made there, but it was a little jarring. I really do love the color contrast in this film too. I think it's mainly just orange and teal, but there's a few scenes where I swear I think it was purple and yellow. I guess I should have wrote that down before I filmed this video because I really don't remember off the top of my head now. And the performances were all around fine, nothing extraordinary here, but I did enjoy them. So first up, Kristen Stewart. Sorry, childhood sweetheart. Anyway, Kristen Stewart, fantastic job. She plays this sort of nerdy, quiet, bureaucratic officer, not officer, but scientist, I guess, who is very much of the books, but is so very much intrigued by this sexy and naughty world of public operations. She does a really good job portraying this sort of fragile persona while still struggling with those inner sexual desires. And it is a pretty interesting and awkward performance, which I like and adds to the vibe of this movie. Next up, Viggo Mortensen of Lord of the Rings fame. That's the only other movie I know he's in. He does a great job as the lead protagonist, who is this artist who performs surgery publicly to get rid of the organs that he develops in his body. I guess I should have gave you the synopsis of this movie in the beginning, but I'll cover that shortly after this. Viggo does a fine job. You know, he's coughing most of the time, which is kind of annoying because I guess he's sick. And, you know, he's got this weird graspy voice like, like this. Like, I swear that was most of the movie, so it's okay. It fits the role, but it's kind of annoying, and I didn't find it, like, that compelling. Léa Seydoux. I'm probably butchering her name. I really should have done more research before I hit record. But she's the Frenchie. Well, actually, I don't know if she's French, but any case, she's the girl who was always getting nude in these movies. So I think the last movie I saw her where she actually took off a bunch of clothes was The French Dispatch, which is that Wes Anderson film, where she also gets naked to be painted in that film, which is kind of similar to the thematic elements in this one. Once again, she does a fine job. She's absolutely gorgeous, and when her nude scene came on, I was like, okay, it's getting a little hot in here. Yeah, I wouldn't say there was anything wrong with her performance. If anything, I would say there was nothing wrong with many people's performances. Maybe it was the direction from the director and maybe the limited contents of the screenplay. All right, so let me give you a quick synopsis of this movie. This is set in the future where humans have rapidly evolved for some unknown reason. Because of this rapid evolution, we've evolved to actually feel no pain. So because of this, there's a spectacle where people like to cut each other and perform operations on one another because it's kind of like this sexual deviant thing and no one can feel pain. So it's like almost a morbid curiosity there as well. And the short and sweet of this plot is This artist who removes organs from his body because of the rapid evolution is confronted with a man who basically wants to change humanity to evolve to consume plastics and metals because that's what is polluting our world. And there's this whole arc about his child was the first born naturally to consume metals and plastics. Everyone else in this world who can consume plastics and metal has had an operation done so that they can do so. So it becomes this whole, existential thing about evolution or what's right. And it's pretty interesting, honestly. But as you'll see, and my thoughts on this movie is, they execute on it very, very poorly. So I think the world is great. It's a unique film. I think there's a lot of potential here. But as I aforementioned, it's just done so poorly. It's so boring. I would say 90% of this movie is just dialogue sequences between characters that seem to do very little to up the ante and actually build any tension. In fact, I think the best arc is the father who's trying to do this whole evolutionary push towards consuming plastics, which I think was pretty interesting idea, but once again does nothing and ends up falling flat, especially in the end of the movie. The whole idea with this world is to sort of build this sort of macabre sexual combination with body horror. But unfortunately, it just kind of feels very tame, especially because everyone in this world doesn't feel pain. So they're just like stabbing each other and they're just like, oh, moaning and loving it. And there's like a little bit of gore. I would say the gore is also very tame, which is why I don't think it lands very well. So all in all, the body horror and sexual undertones don't do too much, but create a certain vibe for the movie, which is kind of nice, but not extravagantly like exciting. And I remember one of the things that drew me to this movie was seeing the devices that were being used. There's like these beds, these autopsies, and these chairs that look like something a xenomorph would have made from the Alien series, but they never explain why they look so weird. They just write it off as this pharmaceutical company or medical company that created these devices for humans, but why does it look like it's something an alien would have made? They never explain that. It's just kind of there for shock value, I guess, and it's there to kind of support the idea that it's in the future because it does look futuristic. So back to the B story plot, I think that was easily the most interesting part of this movie because the whole idea of the sexualization of violence and autopsies wasn't that interesting. You lose me after 5 minutes. Cool idea, but the way they did it wasn't that interesting. So I did like the father trying to push evolution and trying to make the world a better place by having people change their digestive systems to something that would be getting rid of the pollution that we have on this planet. That was cool. Unfortunately, it doesn't really play out. Well, spoilers. So the climax of this movie is about the father trying to have a public autopsy done on his son, who is the first human to be able to consume plastics naturally. But instead, it's revealed that someone has already switched the organs in the son and basically tainted the evidence, and everything he had been pushing for had been basically lost in that attempt. I think the twist is fine, but it doesn't really have much of an impact because they don't really build it up that well. It ends up being like that the government was trying to suppress this movement, so that's why they had the autopsy done to switch the organs, and they like hired Kristen Stewart to do it or something like that. It didn't really make much sense to me at the time. So it ended up being very, very anticlimactic. And literally the last scene is of our main character who basically is kind of slowly falling for this ideology of evolution and consuming plastics. And so he actually stops having operations done to remove the organs and to test whether he has the ability to taste plastic or consume plastic rather. He eats, plastic at the end of the movie that was shown to kill other humans that don't have this digestive system. And the last shot we see is him biting the plastic and the recording of his partner, and he just has one single tear shed down his eye. Great. Like, I guess he can consume plastic. Like, am I supposed to be like profoundly blown away by this? I don't know. Even as someone who really loves cerebral, like thought-provoking movies where there's not always a ton of action going on, I found this film to be incredibly boring. I can only imagine that the average viewer would not like this movie. The sex and horror spectacle isn't really that spectacle. It's kind of tame, honestly. I was kind of expecting more from David Cronenberg. And the most interesting part, which is the theme with the father and the son, doesn't get as much screen time and attention as I would have liked it to, and ultimately doesn't have as much an impact. It doesn't seem to show an impact in this world. So I just found that this movie fell flat very, very hard. And I really wouldn't recommend it for anyone unless you really just want to see it for yourself. Of course, I always invite people to make their own opinions. So don't take my word for it. If you want to, watch it. Tell me if if I'm an idiot and I was wrong, or if you think I was right and this was a boring piece of. Okay, now that we got the hard stuff out of the way, let's talk about a really good movie, which is Watcher. So first, the obvious stuff. Once again, cinematography, fantastic. I actually love the lighting and the framing in this movie. The framing is done so well that it actually reinforces the theme of this movie, which is about watching. And so I was really thoroughly impressed with that. They use a lot of frames within frames. So you're looking through a window at her, or you're looking through a door at a group of people, or you're looking through the frame of the kitchen at a group of people. So a lot of the framing is done very well, and I can tell on purpose to illustrate the theme a little bit more. The lead actress, Micah Monroe, does a fantastic performance, and I think she does a good job carrying this movie because she does hold most of the screen time. So we do need to have great empathy for her, and she's able to deliver a performance that you can feel that's pretty visceral, and I'm really impressed with that. This movie is a slow burner, but I think that helps build the tension that this movie is going for, especially when it comes to the psychological horror genre that this basically falls under. One of the things I really loved about this movie is its masterful execution of its thematic premise through visual storytelling. I sort of alluded to this earlier, which is this idea of frames through frames. I feel like a lot of the cinematography and the shots composition are done to show us like voyeuristically looking on at this girl and the journey that she's going through, which is ironic because the subject matter is she's being stalked by someone who's always watching her through her window. And the reason I say it's ironic because as a viewer, as the audience, we're invited to basically watch this woman just like the predator is in the film. We are this omniscient viewer that gets to see very intimate moments in this woman's life and also get to see the psychological frustration that she has to go through. And I also think that the director did a good job putting us in the subjective position of Micah Monroe. So one of the cool things I noticed was this movie takes place in a foreign country. It already escapes me. I think it's Romania. So I'm probably wrong. Sorry about that. But she doesn't speak the language, and frankly, I don't either. But the movie does not give subtitles for the foreign language. So we are also invited to the isolation of this lady who is unable to communicate with the people around her. And I think that's a very nice, subtle touch, like I said, to give us a subjective experience and to put us in the shoes of Micah Monroe, who's suffering and ultimately being a victim of her surroundings and this predator. And I was also thoroughly impressed to find out that even the title sequence was creatively used. Literally, it's a frame within a frame. Once again, we're looking through the window of Micah Monroe while she's gonna have sex with her partner. It's very uncomfortable, but also once again reinforces the theme of we're watching and this predator is watching. Yeah, I just thought that was kind of cool. So, quick synopsis. Micah Monroe moves to Romania with her boyfriend and ultimately feels and sees that she's being watched by a neighbor across the building. A few run-ins with this stranger in public raise her suspicion, so she goes to get help, but ultimately gets rejected, and that's basically the plot of the film. So what I really like about this movie is that it does a great job of building this ambiguity of whether this person is violent or not. Of course, they set up that there is a murderer in the town very early on in the film, so we're led to believe that this person who's stalking her is that murderer. But they don't ever let that tension release, not until like I think halfway through when that serial killer is caught. And so now all of her concerns that she had been building up until that point are now easily dismissed because, oh, the possible murderer that it could have been has been captured. So obviously the person that you think is stalking you is not stalking you and you're just going crazy, which I'm pretty sure is something women have heard plenty of times, which is frustrating, which is why I like this movie once again, because I think it does a good job of illustrating some of the struggles that women have when it comes to communicating with males, especially about being stalked or followed and stuff like that. But I'll touch on that later on. It is interesting though, because the male dismissal in this movie is used to build tension and also to reinforce the feminist idea that, women are not listened to and not given proper attention when they have certain concerns, especially when they're very valid concerns that this movie kind of brings up. And that's what made this movie so frustrating to watch, because I just thought, man, these men are so stupid. Especially the boyfriend. I despise this guy. This guy was such an idiot. As a man, you bring your girl to a foreign country where she doesn't speak the language. He does very little to help her acclimate. When they're having dinner, there's a dinner scene with with his friends, and they're speaking their native language and they're not even trying to speak English. They speak English for like 2 lines and then they go back to speaking their language, and the boyfriend does nothing but just like join in on them. Dude, like, grow up, pair, and be a man. Like, take care of your woman. What the f? And he was the one most dismissive of her concerns, which is also blew my mind, because it's like, why don't you believe your girl, man? You want her to live and love you, right? Like, why are you not doing some due diligence to, clear her mind, make sure that she's not actually being targeted by this creep across the building? Anyway, he's just a good foil and thematic tool to help bring out the premise of this movie, which is, once again, women don't get listened to. Another great performance actually comes from the stalker himself. He just looks creepy, no offense, my man. But I imagine they also worked on his body language and his stare, because the way he walked and like the way he held himself was just a little off-putting, which I was shocked to see, because I think that's not always the easiest thing to convey, especially because he only gets maybe a few lines of dialogue and they're very short lines. So it was a good job from him. What I also enjoyed was the B character in this film. It ends up being Micah Monroe's neighbor, who is this woman who's empowered and is actually a stripper, I believe, maybe a prostitute. I actually don't really recall too well. She's a really great comfort character. She's the one that actually trusts or believes Micah and tries to help her adjust to this new world. But unfortunately, because she's so used to the male gaze because of her job, she's not as vigilant as Micah and ultimately pays the price for it, which was pretty sad, but also helps to fulfill the theme about not believing women and how certain women in certain professions end up being targets for these creeps. So I think this film will strike a chord with a lot of women. I'm sure these are feelings and experiences that a lot of them have actually had in real life. The feelings of being watched, the experience of being followed, and unfortunately, in some cases, being actually assaulted, which happens in this movie. Not only that, and then have to go back to the normal world, to someone you trust, a police officer, your husband, boyfriend, and to just have all your claims dismissed. Jesus Christ, that must be so frustrating. I couldn't believe it when I watched this movie. I was like, damn, so this is what it's like, huh? So this ends up being a good cautionary tale about, victim blaming and dismissal of women's claims. Final thoughts, this movie is a fantastic movie. It's definitely a slow burner. I think it's like an hour 40 long, but it holds your attention because it's very gripping. It's very tense. There's a lot of moments that slowly build up and kind of stack on top of each other to create a really tense and exciting climax. At least I think so. It's definitely a thought-provoking film. So it's a psychological horror, so don't expect any fancy slasher moments, although there is a nice moment in the last quarter of the film that happens. The ending has a great twist, and I think that if you're a fan of like a stalker horror genre, you'll really like this one. I don't think I gave my rating on Crimes of the Future, but Crimes of the Future I would give 2 out of 10. Watcher, I'd give 9 out of 10. So there you have it, some quick thoughts on some movies, because I realize I have a lot of thoughts when it comes to movies, but no one really to share them with. So I'll share them online, put it on camera, also get to see what other filmmakers and film audience members have thought of these films. Wow, I said films like 30 times, Jesus. But yeah, let me know your thoughts down below. Did you guys watch these movies yet? If you haven't, are you going to now? I wouldn't recommend Crimes of the Future. I'm sorry I keep saying that, but I just really think if you're an average film viewer, you won't like it. If you're an enthusiast, maybe. And maybe you can help me understand it more, because maybe it just went over my head that day and I just was so bored and so out of it, I just didn't enjoy it. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this review, please hit that like button. It helps me out a lot. A subscribe goes a long way as well. I'll be doing more of these movie reviews because, like I said, I have no one else to share this with, so I might as well share it with you if you don't mind hearing it. Thank you once again, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.